Do y'all need more storage? Well, today we're gonna be talking about how to build this 12 by 12 shed with a loft. Here we go. Once you decide the location and foundation you want for your shed, you can start the building process. My preference would have been a slab, but because we might move soon, I wanted the ability to transport the shed if we decide to move. Some people place shed skids directly on the ground, others on a bed of gravel, but because I wanted airflow underneath the shed to minimize moisture as well as a quick cleanup if we decide to move, I used concrete deck blocks. You'll want to obtain your local building code to know how far away to place your shed from the property line. For us, the setback was 3 feet, so I measured 3.5 feet off the fence and then placed my blocks what would be an additional 3 feet inside of each corner where the shed would be. After placing the blocks, I used a stake for a reference point as I moved each block and dug away the sandy soil on the surface until I hit harder earth. I didn't have a tamper, so I hammered a 2x6 against the ground to pack the soil down before the next step, which was to pour my gravel. The ground was sloped where the shed was going, and I knew I didn't want the front of the shed to be higher than 12 inches off the ground, so I subtracted the height of the 4x4 skid and the 2x6 foundation that would be on top of the block to know how far my block should extend above the surface of the ground. All right, now that we have our footers dug out and the rock in and our blocks down, we can check to make sure it's level, and you can either use a line level like this, or you can use a laser level. So we're gonna use a laser level, but you can do this if you wanted to, and you can either put it on stakes, or I strapped it to the blocks just to get something close, and then I'm gonna use a laser level to make it exact. Unfortunately, I didn't get more footage of this process, but you essentially choose your control or the block you want all the other blocks to be level with, and then level the additional blocks to the control block by increasing or decreasing the amount of gravel. Once they are square and level, you can fill around the block with dirt, gravel, or concrete. All right, so we filled all of the dirt back in, and I made 4 of these blocks. And I marked the center, that way I could use my measuring tape and make sure that everything was square by making sure I had the same measurement between this diagonal and that diagonal. And I'm gonna attach the skids to these blocks, which will hold the skids in place and hold the shed firm where it is. The nice thing about the elevated foundation is that if there is ever any settling, you can always use a jack and shims to make it level again. Once being done with the footers, I installed the skids to the 4x4 squares I put in the center of the deck blocks and checked for square one more time before starting the process. Attaching them together helps stop any lateral movement, but not lift if you live in an area prone to tornadoes or hurricanes. For that, you should check your local building codes to see if anchors are required. I attached the squares to the skids using flat plates manufactured by Strong Tie and 2-inch screws. I also pre-drilled my holes to reduce the risk of any splitting. After your skids are set, you can lay out your 2x6 foundation. The 4 exterior 2x6 rim joists are treated lumber, and the interior 2x6 floor joists are untreated lumber. The front and back rim joists went the full length of the shed, which was 142 inches, but the side rim joists were sandwiched in between the front and back boards at 139 inches long, creating a perfect square once you add the thickness of the front and back rim joists. I used bricks to hold the 2x6 in place while I installed 3 3-inch exterior screws to tie each corner together. I then measured 139 inches for each floor joist, cut each one, and then marked from my front rim joist to my back rim joist every 16 inches and placed the center of each floor joist at the 16-inch mark. This is done so that the plywood will always meet up over a joist. And now what we're going to do is we're going to secure the interior floor joist to the outer frame using joist hangers, and we're going to attach them with screws through the outer frame. The reason I screwed the floor joist through the rim joist with one screw was to make it easier to hold in place while I was installing the joist hangers. We're going to attach some ties from the interior joist to our skids. We're going to attach it to the front pieces of the skid first and the rim joist, and then we're going to make sure that everything is lined up and square, and then we'll go ahead and attach the rest of the ties and the rest of the joists. So to clarify, I'm making sure I have an equal overhang on each side of the skids, connecting the front rim joist to the skids, measuring diagonally to each corner to ensure everything's square, and then connecting the rear rim joist to the skids to hold everything in place as I install the rest of my brackets. All right, so we have our floor joist hangers on every joist, and we have Hurricane Ties tying each joist to the skids underneath. If you are using tongue and groove plywood flooring like I did, realize that the tongue is included in the 48-inch width, so once you put them together with another piece, the true width is 47.5 inches. That being said, you'll have to make the footprint a little smaller than the full 144 inches like I did in order to have full coverage with the plywood. I attached the plywood floor with 2-inch exterior screws every 12 inches. All right, it's another day. We have finished the deck portion or flooring system for the shed, and today what we're going to do is we're going to put up the walls. I have all of our studs. I have 42 studs, which should be enough for the full length studs at 90 inches long. And we're going to cut these 2x4x12s to size so they can be the exact length of our flooring system, and then we'll start standing up those walls after we piece it together. I'm going to start with the front and back walls that will run the full length of the shed and cut my 2x4x12 bottom and top plates for the wall to length, which was 142 inches. Then I'll mark 16 inches on center on my bottom and top plates and line up all of my 90-inch studs just like I did for the flooring system. This way, the exterior wall panels will line up with a stud at each joint. The front wall is the most complicated because there is a door and a window on this shed, so the better your dimensions are planned out, the quicker this wall will go together. You still want to have a stud every 16 inches for where each exterior wall panel will meet up. Your window and door will have a header to add strength and rigidity, and if you're wondering what my layout looked like, here it is. All right, so here are my drawings for what the front is going to look like. We're going to have a 64-inch door opening width and an 80-inch height. And this is the drawing to scale, where we're going to have our window set up over here on the right and our door here on the left. I wanted a 64-inch door opening in case I ever got a zero-turn mower with a 60-inch cut, but you can make yours to fit your own needs. Putting together this wall is a bit like a puzzle because you need to put it together in an order where you can still access joints with your nail gun. Start by connecting the bottom plate to the wall studs, then do the header for your door, the bottom sill for the window, header for the window, then everything else. When lifting the walls, attach a board to the adjacent rim joist at an angle and have your level and nail gun ready. Having an extra hand for this step is almost a must. When you're creating your wall studs, you want to make sure that they're 16 inches on center, and you want them to be in line with the floor joist underneath all the way around, and that way you'll have a stronger structure. As you can see, I doubled up the studs on the ends of the front and back walls, whereas the side walls only had one stud at each end. I attached the side walls to the front and rear walls on the ends. I attached each wall to the floor/rim joist using a combination of 3.5-inch screws and 3.5-inch nails, and I also tied the walls together at the top using a method I'll show you in a moment. Okay, so we're up here at the top where the two walls meet, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a second plate, top plate up here that's going to overlap these two walls and bring them together. After the walls were completed, I started the roof by securing two boards that extended 30 inches above the top of the front and back shed walls. These would hold the top 2x6x16 in place that all the rafters would connect to. Okay, here's our lumber for our rafters, and it's being cut at a 23-degree angle. I have a 2x6 up there, and I just have it temporarily supported with this 2x4, and it's gonna be at a height of 3 feet. And we're gonna be running it down from the peak down to the sides. And I have our little bird mouths cut out, and I did use a template. I figured it out with one board up there first, and then just set it up there, cut the bird mouth for it, and then cut the angle, and then I just trace it to make them all the same, and then I have 24 of them. The 2x6x16 I cut down to 174 inches, which would allow for a 16-inch overhang on either side of the shed. Each rafter was made from a 2x4x8. I attached my 2x4 rafters to the 2x6 up at the top using 2x4 joist hangers and Hurrican Ties where they meet up with the wall. I used 14.5-inch 2x4 blocks off of my last rafter that sits on top of the wall to extend my eave out over the front and back of the shed. I also placed a 2x4 block up top on the 2x6 so I would have something to nail my eave rafters to. Once the rafters were finished, I installed bracing to add strength and so I would have something to attach my wall panels to. These braces should also be spaced so that they are 16 inches on center, where the panels will be joined together. I left the center without a brace so that it wouldn't block my gable vent. All right, here you can see we put the vertical supports from our rafter down to our wall. I put a nail on both sides and on both sides up here, which has really made it a lot more sturdy. And in adding this extra eave overhang, we just did a 15.5-inch block in between and then made it go out. That way we could have this eave overhanging our door, and we also did one on the back just so that the rain doesn't run all down the sides of our shed. Here you can see the rafters are all hung with joist hangers with 2 nails through the sides. Hangers have 4 nails going into this main beam, and we also have up above it 1 nail in the top of each one, so there's 3 nails total. And the one on the top I put in there before we brought them up here, and it was just sticking out about 2 inches, and then I used a palm nailer to go ahead and set it, and that held it in place while I put the joist hangers up. All right, you can see we have 1 hurricane strap already on here, and I'm gonna go ahead and add 1 to every single rafter. Once you have the rafters fully installed, you can start the process of installing your wall panels. The reason I cut my wall studs to 90 inches was so that the wall panels would overlap my rim joists, ensuring rain would drip down instead of entering the shed at the bottom or sill plate of my wall. The manufacturer of these smart panels recommends flashing at the bottom by the sill plate, but because the panels overlap the rim joist over 1.5 inches, I didn't install the flashing. The wall panels add strength and stability to the structure, but before you install any of them, you want to make sure each wall is level by screwing in one end of a diagonal 2x4 shown here. Place a level on the last stud of that wall while pushing the wall until it is level, and then while holding the wall level, have someone screw in the other end of the diagonal 2x4, which will hold it in place as you install the panels. You will do this for each wall. Installing the wall panels is really a 2-person job, but if you don't have another hand, you can set the bottom of your wall panel on a bucket or bricks or wood to hold it in place while you nail it in like I did on the sidewall. Because our dimensions were just shy of the full 144 inches, we had a little excess in the last board of each wall, which I used my jigsaw to remove once the final panel of each wall was installed. For the nails on the siding, you really want them to be above the surface of the siding. You don't want them to be countersunk because it will need to be caulked or painted with this smart siding. Also, you want the nails on the ends and the joints to be every 6 inches and to penetrate 1.5 inches into the stud. And for every mark that's not a joint on the studs, you're going to do your spacing every 12 inches as opposed to every 6 inches. Before I installed the front walls paneling, I decided to do my fascia and furring strips. I used treated 1x4x8 strips because there were no 1x4x16s available, and I screwed them into my rafters using 2-inch screws at each rafter. I brought my circular saw up to the roof with me so I could just cut off the excess instead of having to waste time measuring. I then installed my first piece of fascia on the gable end using a treated 1x6x10. I started by cutting a 23-degree angle for the top and then measured the distance from the bottom to the peak while adding 3/4 of an inch so it would extend past and overlap my fascia at the bottom. I also tested my drip edge that will sit on top of my furring strip and over the front of the fascia. After that looked good, I installed the rest of my fascia. All right, so here I'm putting up the peak fascia, and I screwed a little block in there with a nail sticking out or a screw sticking out. That way I could nail the top end, rest that on the bottom here on the screw, and then I can remove the block and then nail it in. That way I don't need two people to hold it. It started to rain, and unfortunately I forgot to hit record on the installation of the first half of the roofing panels. But when you're installing the roof panels, you want to pay attention to this next part. I'm videoing this after its completion, but I wanted to state that when you're putting up your roofing panels, you want to just install the first one with one screw, and then to where it can shift, slide another panel underneath that one, and even maybe a third one. That way you can start to see your line and how the first panel should be angled, because how that first panel is angled determines what this line is going to look like. So you want to make sure that they're all going to have the same amount of overhang, and that first panel is straight. Once you have your first panel angled the way you want it, I'd recommend putting one screw at the location of each furring strip or marking it with a marker as you go for each panel. This way you'll have a good idea where the furring strips are when you come back to add the remaining screws. You also want to mark the location of your rafters at the top of the panels for when you're installing your ridge cap, unless you add additional furring strips under the screw locations for the ridge cap. If you choose to go with a metal roof, it can be extremely slippery, especially if it rains a little bit like it did for us. My dad was a great help though by allowing me to tie myself to him on the other side of the roof in case I slid down. My mom was also a great helper by handing me screws and the ridge cap when I needed them. You will screw only one screw at each ridge on the panels except for the ends or joints of each panel, where you will install 2 screws on either side of the ridge of the panel. If you do the front wall panels right, you will be able to use the door cutouts as the surface for your doors. We removed the door cutout and the window cutout using a reciprocating saw. I found the window for the shed in someone's trash about a year ago, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to use it. The installation was super easy because this type of window allows you to just nail the window over the hole and then caulk the frame. The gable ends only used one exterior panel per side and was a lot easier to install than I imagined. You can see that I didn't measure 16 inches on center for my vertical braces here, which came back to bite me as I had to add blocking where the seams of the panels met up. When you're measuring for the triangular portion on the top of the shed, you're going to measure the distance between where your soffit would go and here at the bottom of this flashing. This is called Z flashing, which is going to help with the water to flow and drip over the edge of the board beneath it without getting it all wet, without getting your shed wet inside. So you'll measure from that to that, which is in this instance 22 3/4, to the distance to the bottom of the 2x4, which is 1 1/4 inches, and then we'll go make those measurements on our pieces of plywood. So here you'll see 22 3/4 inches marked right here, and we're gonna go over to this edge, which is 1 1/4 inch, and we'll draw a line from here to up there, and then we'll cut out our triangle. You will have to make a cutout for your gable vent in the middle piece, as well as a cutout to go around the 2x6 beam at the top. So have your hole saw and jigsaw ready. Next, I added trim to the shed using 1x4x8s. Although my framing for the window and door were lined up, the window placement was actually lower once it was installed, which made the top trim pieces not line up. However, I ripped a 1x6 I had left over from my fascia to gain the extra height that I needed to make the door trim and the window trim even. For the soffit coming down from the peak, I have a block tacked up there where we're going to nail it to. We'll attach to these as well as this rafter coming down from the top. But here, we're gonna attach the other piece of soffit coming from this way to this. And because of the way the soffit runs, it's not gonna hit this. So I'm gonna add a little block here, attach it here. That way we have something to nail to. And then we'll have this block here for the end. Also, our trim on the corner, I'm gonna have to notch out just the top right here using my reciprocating saw. That way the piece of soffit will scoot in, and then we can caulk everything and make it look nice. Now you can measure in multiple places to see how wide your soffit needs to be, and then you can rip it with the table saw. This is 14 3/4 inches. The soffit from the peak to the bottom is 91.5 inches. So I know I have somewhere to attach the soffit this way. I'm marking my line where I need to nail the soffit into this side, or I could add a block on this side and we can just tack it in that way. To make the loft, I use 2x4x12s as the supports because I don't intend on putting a lot of weight up there. The extra 4x4 square of flooring and scrap piece of plywood left over for my soffit was the perfect amount to use as my loft flooring. Alright, so here is the plan for our door. We're going to use half lap joints to join these pieces of wood together, and we're going to make it 31.5 by 79 inches for this 80 by 64 inch door opening, and we're going to make 2 of those. For the shed door frames, I'm using a half lap joint system, as you see me do in several other projects. This will ensure square corners and a strong and solid frame. You can easily use your table saw or circular saw and chisel to create these joints. Set your fence depth to the width of your wood you're using. For us, that will be 3.5 inches, and the blade height to half the thickness of the board, which will be 3/4 of an inch for us. You'll then make a series of cuts using the fence as your guide for the full width of the intersecting board. Hammer out the material while wearing safety glasses, then use your table saw or chisel to clean up the joint. Once you have all your pieces cut, your half lap joint will look like this, and the door will go together like this, and we'll glue it and screw it together. To attach the parts of the door frame together, I pre-drilled 4 holes in every joint to reduce splitting, used Titebond Ultimate wood glue as an adhesive, and used 1 1/4 inch screws to screw them together. I also added a cross member to add more strength and support. When you cut the cross member for your door, you can lay it underneath the framing, making sure to have an overlap on both members of the joint. Your cross member should start on the bottom for the hinge side of the door and extend upwards to the outside top corner of the door, though I installed one of mine in reverse. So pay attention when you're attaching your exterior panels to your door. All right, so we have the 2 cutouts from our door opening. Whenever we hung our siding, then we cut out the cavity where the door was going to be, and now we have our door frames, and what we'll do is we'll put those on top, nail it in. I'm going to use a jigsaw just to trim around the edges, and then we'll hang the door with some trim. I attached the siding to the door frame using 1.5 inch exterior nails that I had left over from my joist hangers, and spaced them out about every 6 to 8 inches. All right, so we have our siding on our door, and we have our door on a 2x4 just to keep it elevated. And now what I'm going to do is put the trim on this side and on the top, and then we'll be able to see where we're going to put our hinges. My camera battery died in the process of hanging the doors, but what I did was I installed 2 screws and used a level to make sure that the hinge was level. As I screwed those in, I attached 1 screw just to hold the door in place at the top. I did the same thing for the bottom, and I'm using a traditional just lock and latch system, not using a handle or anything. And I like this one because it covers up the screws whenever it's locked and latched. That way people cannot unscrew the latch and take it off. I use a 2x4 up underneath the door to hold it basically in the middle of the door frame and hold it level while I screwed it in. So I set the base of the door frame on the 2x4. I also added this piece to the end of my door frame And that way, whenever you close it, you cannot see in the shed, and this overlaps. So you can see that there's a little bit of a overlap here on this 1x. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna add a latch to the top of this so that this door locks in place, and then this will be the main door here on the left. All right, this is the type of latch that I got. It's really meant for your foot on the floor, but what you'll do is you push this latch in up at the top, and then you just use your finger to push this lever up and it will release the latch. But this is what we'll be using to lock this door in. For the ramp, I got a 2x6x12, and I'm gonna be cutting it into 3 different pieces to support the ramp. Now, depending on their slope, you're gonna need a different angle. What I did was cut this angle first, and then I cut this angle second, just to see what I needed. I did a little trial and error. Now that I have it set up the way I want, and you can use a block or something to hold it, I'm gonna go ahead and make 3 of these and use this as my template, and then we'll go ahead and install the boards for the ramp. Before building your ramp, you'll want to know the thickness of the material you're installing on top of your supports. Close your doors, subtract the thickness of that material, and then you'll know how high to mount your supports. As you can see, I notched out the top of the 2x6 with my jigsaw where it would come in contact with the siding beneath the door so that it would lay flush against my rim joist. I also used 2x6 joist hangers to attach the ramp to the shed. After I had all the joist hangers where I wanted them, I removed the boards and put some spare pavers underneath where the boards sit so they wouldn't be sitting in the dirt, and this would give a wider footprint to reduce any settling of the ramp. To ensure everything was level, I laid a piece of angle iron across all 3 supports and made sure it was touching every board in multiple spots. If anything needs to be adjusted, you can just add or remove dirt underneath the paver. I used that same piece of aluminum angle iron for the door's threshold. I cut it to 64 inches in length with my grinder and cutoff wheel, pre-drilled holes about every 12 inches, and screwed it down with 2-inch exterior screws. I chose to use treated deck boards for my ramp, which are 5/8 inch thick, and attach them to my supports using 2-inch exterior screws. If you can find 16-foot deck boards, you will have virtually no waste with a 64-inch door opening. I was very pleased with this build, and I was nervous that I might have a lot of wasted materials, but I was able to use almost every scrap of wood. Whether it was for blocking when I screwed up and didn't put my gable braces 16 inches on center, or adding collar ties to increase the strength of my rafters, or having the leftover plywood for my loft, this build was a very efficient use of materials. Once the interior was finished, it was time to finish the exterior by caulking all of my seams around the trim and soffit. Once everything is caulked, you can paint. I used DAP Dynaflex Ultra Window and Door Caulk to caulk everything, and Sherwin-Williams paint. The main color of the shed is called Sight White, though I wish I had gone with something a little bit darker, like Agreeable Gray, to add a little more contrast to the extra white trim. Once you are finished with the painting, you can remove the tape over the hinges, replace your latch, and then you'll be done. All right, guys, I hope this video was helpful for you. I am going to be putting most of my materials list below, and if you like this video, please like it. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. And if you're watching this on a medium that you can subscribe, feel free to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Peace and God bless.